Magic the Gathering Online is complicated. Ever since it launched, it's been plagued with issues and bugs, and a lot of these are the result of trying to translate a paper game into the digital world. Now, I believe that the majority of people who use Magic Online are pretty happy with it, and I would count myself among those, but there is a group of people who disparage it, and I think it's safe to say that the public opinion of Magic Online isn't great. Almost everyone thinks that there are changes that could be made that would improve the client. I'm Dennis from Windmill Slam. Let's talk about the top 5 changes that Magic Online needs. Okay, so this is how the Magic Online economy works. People use money to purchase tickets, which you can trade for cards or use to enter events. Except events don't pay out in tickets, they pay out in play points, which are like tickets, except you can't use them to buy cards, you can just use them to enter other events because they're not tradable. And events also pay out in booster packs sometimes, which are worth an amount of tickets, and the cards inside them are also worth an amount of tickets, which affects how much the booster's worth. You can also use boosters to enter limited events though, just not at the same rate that you could with just tickets or with just play points. And then constructed events pay out in treasure chests, which contain 3 cards, and they're from different lists of different rarities, and all those cards are worth different ticket amounts, but of course you can trade those for play points, and then you can trade the closed chest. The whole thing is maddeningly complicated, complex, and nuanced. And as difficult as it may be for someone like me who uses the client all the time to understand, it's incredibly difficult to explain to a new player. It is a huge and unnecessary barrier to entry to the game. Now, I know that something like Hearthstone doesn't have to contend with the fact that it has a paper version that you can redeem cards in. Hearthstone doesn't even have a secondary market, so its economy is very, very simple. But there has to be some midway between Magic Online and Hearthstone that is better than what we currently have, because the current system could certainly use a lot of the fat trimmed off. This next one, I must confess, is not a problem for me, because I don't have, and have never had, a Mac. I had an iPhone for a while, that's about it. But with the usage of Macs growing year by year and more people playing games on Macs, it's becoming increasingly embarrassing that the client isn't available there. Now, I know that you can dual boot or run a virtual machine, and Marshall Sutcliffe from Limited Resources even wrote an article about that a couple of years ago, but those are unnecessary hoops to make your players jump to get from wanting to play the game and being able to play the game. And don't even get me started on how great it would be to have the client available on tablets or even on phones, but Macs would be a pretty solid start. I mentioned Hearthstone earlier, and it's going to come up again here because Hearthstone and other games like it, like Eternal from Direwolf Digital, a studio that actually has a lot of Magic pros who work at it, can utilize the fact that they are digital-only games. You can do things in a digital game that you can't do in a paper game. For example, Xenon Cultist from Eternal gives your creatures +2/+2 when they die, so they are bigger in the graveyard, and the game remembers that they're bigger if they were to come back somehow. You can't really track that in paper, but for a digital game, that's a piece of cake. And then there's also more interesting design space, like Nose Dormu from Hearthstone reduces the amount of time that a player has to take their turn. Imagine a card in Magic that was overpowered but knocked 5 minutes off your clock on Magic Online. That's really interesting. And then there's more random cards like Curious Glimmerroot. It gives you 3 cards and asks you to choose which one of those you think started in your opponent's deck. And if you get it right, you get a free copy of that card into your hand. That's not really possible in paper, but again, it's pretty simple on Magic Online. They already demonstrated that Magic Online can generate random cards through things like Momir. So there's a lot of design space that just hasn't been explored. I don't understand why the time that was spent on things like Tempest Remastered, or even something I quite enjoy like the Magic Online Cube, couldn't be spent on something like Digital Masters. Why isn't there a draft format that is just available on Magic Online that utilizes the fact that you can do stuff like that you can't in paper? They have the same for paper. In Conspiracy, you can do things that are only possible by the fact that you're sitting next to the person you're drafting with. You can affect their picks, you can crack new packs, all that stuff. There's lots and lots and lots of stuff, and a much deeper well of exploration online that I think WotC just isn't exploring properly. And they're leaving money on the table, I think. I know if Digital Masters existed and I could draft it, I would draft it non-stop. That's a unique experience that I can get with Magic that I can't get in paper, and it would draw so many more people to play Magic Online. Function should always trump aesthetics, but that doesn't mean that aesthetics aren't important. And one of the most common complaints about Magic Online is how it looks. Magic Online looks dull and flat and boring. That's a problem for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's difficult for new players to grasp when the client is so functionally laid out. It's not visually engaging, it doesn't draw you in. And second of all, it makes the client difficult to watch. If you want to watch a streamer or watch something like the Vintage Super League or draft videos on YouTube, it gets a little grating after a while. Now don't get me wrong, I don't want explosions and cards flying all over the screen and silly voices and all that stuff. That doesn't appeal to me at all. But again, there has to be something that we can do to move it from the current state it's in. I don't know what kind of design choice that would be, I'm not a graphic designer. But for example, the home screen has the events of the day laid out in mustard yellow on a light blue background, and even I can tell you that it looks hideous. If you expect your players to spend hours and hours in your game drafting or in a long MOX event, you have to make it a little softer on the eyes. I said function trumps aesthetics, and it's true, which is why it's such a problem that Magic Online stability is so poor. Again, this is a problem that's gotten a lot better in recent years, but I remember a time, back around Magic 2015, when the client would crash every single draft. A couple picks in, the client would just seize up and crash. This was due to a memory leak issue at the time that meant that the longer the client was open, the more and more it weighed on the computer's processor until it eventually just gave up. But I was filing for reimbursement every single time. So much so that I got an email from Wizard support informing me that my claims were being investigated for being fraudulent, but the client was just crashing that often. Now at the time I was playing on a laptop, and it was a pretty beefy laptop, but a laptop nonetheless. Nowadays I play on this big gaming tower behind me and the client still crashes. Last week it crashed in the middle of a draft. It didn't freeze, there was no main navigations not responding, I didn't have to use Task Manager or anything. It just closed. And then it wasn't in my program list. I couldn't search for it, nothing. It was just gone. I had to go online and re-download the setup executable, and when I clicked on that, it just booted back up and dumped me back midway through Pack 2 as if nothing had happened. Like a grandfather waking up at the table after falling asleep at dinner. In this day and age where there's much more complicated games, a game that just displays pictures of cards should not be this difficult to run and should not be this unstable. Before they tackle any of the other things I've talked about, or any other issues at all, they really have to lock down on how reliable it is to run the client. To end on a more positive note, if I made this video 18 months or 2 years ago, the top 5 problems would be much bigger. So while the client has come leaps and bounds, it still has a long way to go. And the pace at which it got to here is not really acceptable. Do you play Magic Online? If you don't, what's stopping you signing up? And if you do, what do you think could be done to improve your experience? Let us know in the comments below, and until next time, I've been Dennis from Windmill Slam.